Elon Musk saves Joe Biden from hostage situation. Joe Biden sat in the Oval Office, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. The soft hum of quiet conversation filled the air as advisors and aides shuffled around, discussing the latest developments in foreign relations. It was a typical day, at least it seemed that way. The weight of the world often hung heavy in this room, but in moments like these, when everything was running smoothly, it felt manageable. Biden had learned to savor these brief moments of calm. The door opened, and one of his senior advisors, Sarah, entered with a brisk pace. She had a folder in hand, her expression focused and serious. Biden didn't need to ask what was in the folder. It wasn't a casual drop-in. There was always something that needed his attention. "Mr. President, we have a situation," Sarah began, her voice low but steady. Biden's brow furrowed as he set his coffee down. He had learned to read his staff well, and the tone in Sarah's voice signaled that this wasn't just another briefing. "What's going on?" Sarah placed the folder in front of him, but instead of opening it, she kept her eyes on him. "There's been a breach. The White House has been compromised." Biden's heart skipped a beat. The White House compromised? It was the kind of phrase that never made sense until it did. The world seemed to go still for a moment as he processed her words. "What do you mean compromised? Is this an attack?" "We don't have full details yet, but we've received intelligence that suggests a hostage situation. A group of individuals managed to infiltrate the premises. We've lost communication with the security team on the lower levels." Biden stood up, his mind racing. His first thought was for his family. Jill and the grandchildren were in the residence at the time. He quickly composed himself, the years of experience kicking in. He had been through crises before, but there was something about this, something about the feeling that this was different. "Secure the premises, make sure the residence is locked down. I want the best of the Secret Service on this immediately," Biden said, his voice calm but laced with authority. He motioned for Sarah to continue. Sarah nodded. "We've already implemented the lockdown protocol. But Mr. President, it's complicated. They're demanding to speak with you." Biden didn't miss the implication. "They're demanding something?" "Yes. But we don't know what it is." It's clear that they're not just after money or information, they're targeting something specific. "We're trying to pinpoint the threat." Biden's jaw tightened. There was no time for second-guessing now. He knew the stakes. His country, his life, and his legacy all depended on how he handled this moment. The calm exterior he had developed over years of leadership would need to serve him well now. The tension in the room was palpable as Sarah handed him a secure tablet, showing the footage of the breach. A group of masked individuals, armed and heavily tactical, moved swiftly through the lower halls. They moved with purpose, and their faces were hidden, but it was clear they were well coordinated. The video froze as the group reached a security door, cutting off the feed just as they began to force their way inside. The silence that followed was deafening. Biden studied the screen. His mind wasn't just on the hostage situation, it was on the national security implications. The White House wasn't just any building. It was the seat of power for the United States. To compromise it was to shake the very foundation of the country. "Where are we with the suspects?" Biden asked, turning to Sarah, his voice even, though his mind was anything but. "We don't know yet, sir. But the brief intel suggests they might have insider knowledge. It's possible they had someone on the inside helping them." Biden's hand gripped the edge of the desk. This was bigger than just a random attack. It was a calculated move, a carefully orchestrated attempt to destabilize everything he had worked for. The last thing he needed was for this to go public. No matter what happened, the country couldn't afford another crisis, especially one that struck at the heart of the government. "There's someone I want to talk to," Biden said, his tone firm. "Get me Elon Musk." The phone line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Mr. President," Elon Musk said, his voice as calm as ever, but there was an underlying urgency to it. "What's going on?" "Something's happened, Elon. The White House has been compromised. We're dealing with a hostage situation, and we need help, your kind of help. We need to act quickly, and we need to outsmart whoever's behind this." Musk's response was immediate. "I'm on my way. I'll send you the protocols for a tech-based lockdown, but you need to trust me. I have eyes everywhere." Biden felt a strange sense of reassurance. Musk was unconventional, unpredictable at times, but when it came to solving problems, there was no one better. The man had a track record of thinking outside the box. He might just be the key to unlocking this entire situation. Secure the area around the hostages. I'll call you as soon as we know more, Musk continued, his voice steady. And Mr. President, don't worry. We'll get this sorted. You've got a lot of people out there working for you. As the line went dead, Biden's mind raced. He knew that Musk's involvement would raise questions he couldn't answer yet. But right now, he didn't care about politics. All he cared about was getting those hostages out alive. Meanwhile, in the midst of the chaos, Marcus Davis, a senior special operations officer, was already in motion. He had been the first to get the call from the Secret Service after the breach was confirmed. His task was clear. He was to help coordinate the response on the ground. He wasn't just any officer, he was the best of the best, a man trained to make life-or-death decisions in a heartbeat. As soon as he received the call from Biden's team, he mobilized, grabbing his gear and heading to the command center. By the time he reached the Situation Room, he had a full picture of the scope of the attack. His phone buzzed with another message from Musk. I'll be coordinating tech support for the perimeter lockdown and jamming any signals the perpetrators might be using to communicate. Stay focused. Trust the process. Marcus paused, taking in the information. He knew that Musk's expertise would be invaluable, but there was one thing he couldn't shake, a feeling deep in his gut that this was more than just a hostile takeover. Whoever was behind this knew how to play the game. They weren't amateurs. And that worried him. Back in the heart of the White House, Biden was now pacing. Sarah had left to join the security team, and the room had grown eerily quiet. Every minute felt like an hour, each second dragging on as if time itself was slowing down. He knew that the longer this went on, the more dangerous the situation would become. His mind kept circling back to the question he couldn't yet answer. Who was behind this and why? Joe Biden stood in the Oval Office, his mind working furiously. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder with every passing second, marking the heavy silence that had descended over the room. Outside, the situation in the White House was deteriorating, and he knew the longer it took to resolve, the greater the risk. It was one thing to have a diplomatic crisis, but this was a direct assault on the heart of the nation. The stakes were higher than anything he had faced before. As the weight of the situation pressed down on him, Biden heard the door open again. It was Sarah, her face drawn tight with worry. "Mr. President," she said, her voice low but urgent. "We've just gotten a communication from the intruders. They've sent a message." Biden's stomach tightened. "What's it say?" "They want you, personally. And they're making threats. They claim they have everything under control, every exit blocked, every phone tapped. If we try to make a move without their approval, they'll start executing hostages." The words hit Biden like a punch to the gut. His mind flashed to his family. Jill. The kids. The staff. The people who depended on him. His first instinct was to demand a counterstrike, but he quickly quelled that thought. Hasty decisions could lead to disaster. "Get me a secure line to the Joint Chiefs." Now, as Sarah hurried out, Biden turned back to the screen. The message from the intruders was clear. They wanted something, but what? And who were they really? Were they just a random group looking to make a name for themselves? Or was there something more at play here? Was this a politically motivated attack? Or something more personal? Biden closed his eyes for a moment, trying to focus, trying to think clearly. He had faced threats before, international ones, domestic ones, terrorist attacks, and political upheaval. But this felt different. There was an almost personal quality to it, as though whoever was behind this had been planning for months, maybe years. His thoughts were interrupted as Sarah returned, followed by a stern-faced military officer, General MacArthur, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The man had a presence about him that immediately made the room feel smaller, his uniform crisp, his posture ramrod straight. "Mr. President," MacArthur began, "we've been in contact with all relevant units. We've initiated lockdown protocols across the entire building. The Secret Service has all its teams in position." But Biden raised a hand, stopping him. "But what?" "There's a problem with the intel," MacArthur said, his voice clipped. "The terrorists, whoever they are more advanced than we initially thought. They've managed to disable our cameras in key locations, and they've blocked all of our comms. We've got no eyes on the situation." Biden felt his chest tighten. "That's not good enough, General. I need those cameras back online, and I need to know what's going on with the hostages right now." "What's the next step?" "We're attempting to access their comms using alternative methods," MacArthur replied. "But we may need to bring in more resources. I've been in touch with Elon Musk, and he's offered to help with the tech side of things. His team is working on it as we speak." Biden's expression softened slightly. Musk had always been one to throw his hat in the ring, but this was different. Musk's involvement could make the difference between life and death today. With his vast resources and expertise, Musk could hack through the barriers the attackers had set up. It was an unconventional choice, but Biden was learning to trust Musk's skills, even if it meant stepping out of the comfort zone. "Good," Biden said, his voice resolute. "Keep him in the loop. And get me updates every 10 minutes. We'll handle the rest from here." MacArthur nodded and turned to leave, but just as he reached the door, he stopped. "Mr. President," he said, turning back. "I don't want to alarm you, but there's been an escalation. The intruders are starting to make demands. They want something in exchange for releasing the hostages." Biden's heart skipped a beat. "What do they want?" "They've asked for high-level documents. Intelligence reports that would compromise national security." Biden's face darkened. "I can't give them that. We won't negotiate with terrorists." "We're not in a position to negotiate, sir," MacArthur replied carefully. "But if we don't meet their demands, they've made it clear they'll kill everyone in the building. We have no way of knowing how many people are trapped in there or what resources they have at their disposal." For a moment, Biden said nothing. His eyes burned with frustration. This was a nightmare. But he couldn't afford to let his emotions rule. Lives were at stake. "Do what you need to do to get those documents secure," Biden said, his voice hardening. "But make sure we don't make a mistake. I don't want to risk more lives." Meanwhile, in the chaos unfolding inside the White House, Elon Musk was already coordinating his team. The room where the hostages were being held was heavily secured, and Musk's first priority was to find a way in, without alerting the attackers to their presence. He was no stranger to high-pressure situations, but this was different. This wasn't about launching a rocket into space or sending a car to Mars. This was about saving lives, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. As he paced in front of a large bank of monitors, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. His team had already begun working on hacking the White House's communication grid, but the attackers had been smarter than they anticipated. They had jammed every signal, taken control of critical systems, and disabled most of the security infrastructure. Musk turned to his lead engineer, Oliver. "How long before we can get through their jamming?" Oliver adjusted his glasses, his eyes glued to the screen. "We're making progress, but it's tricky. The jamming signal is coming from a high-level satellite, which means we need to take down their uplink." Musk nodded. He had expected this. It wasn't an easy fix, but it was solvable. He had solved more complicated problems before. "Once we take out the uplink," Musk said, "we can access their comms and track their movements. I want eyes on every inch of that building." "We're on it, Elon," Oliver replied, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. Musk didn't have time to watch the process unfold. He had one goal: to save Biden and the hostages. This was bigger than any other project he had worked on. The pressure was immense, but Musk thrived under pressure. His mind was a well-oiled machine, constantly calculating, predicting, and adjusting. Back at the White House, Biden was preparing for his next move. His mind raced with possible strategies, but each decision came with risks. He had to think about the bigger picture: the security of the nation, the people inside, and the political fallout from whatever happened next. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Musk. "Uplink down. We have comms access. I'll start sending intel as soon as possible." Biden felt a rush of relief. Finally, they had the advantage. "Sarah," he said, standing up from his desk, "we need to move. I don't want anyone else getting hurt. Let's bring this situation to an end." The tension in the White House remained thick, but with Musk's help, Biden could finally see a way out. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of those trapped inside, but the future of the nation itself. The tension inside the White House was palpable, but with each passing minute, there was a glimmer of hope. Musk's message had given Biden a brief respite, but it was fleeting. The hostage-takers were still in control of the building, and Biden knew the situation wasn't over until everyone was safe. The secure room was quiet now, save for the low hum of communications equipment and the soft tapping of keys. Sarah, standing at Biden's side, kept her eyes glued to the screen, watching the flow of information as it came in from Musk's team. There was still so much they didn't know. How many attackers were there? What kind of weapons did they have? And most importantly, where were the hostages being kept? Biden tried to steady his breathing, forcing his mind to focus. Every decision, every action from this point on would shape the outcome of the day. His team was ready, his military advisors were in position, and Musk was on the job. But Biden knew that even with all the resources at his disposal, there was no certainty in this kind of situation. The hostages' lives were in the balance, and he had no room for error. The door to the Situation Room opened again, and General MacArthur stepped in, his face tense, but resolute. "Mr. President, we have confirmation from Musk's team," MacArthur began, his voice firm. "They've broken through the attackers' comms. We've got their locations." Biden's heart raced. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. With the hostiles' positions identified, the next phase of the operation could begin. "Send teams in immediately," Biden ordered, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his mind. "We move fast. Get those hostages out and neutralize the threat." As MacArthur turned to carry out the orders, Sarah stepped closer to Biden. "Mr. President," she said softly, "what about Musk? Shouldn't we bring him in?" Biden hesitated. He had trusted Musk with his unorthodox methods and brilliant mind, but the situation was shifting, and having Musk on the ground might complicate things. However, he couldn't deny the man's resourcefulness. "Bring him in," Biden said, his voice resolute. "We'll need every bit of help we can get." Elsewhere in the White House, the attackers were becoming increasingly frustrated. They had anticipated smooth control, but things weren't going according to plan. The comms jamming was starting to malfunction, the very thing that had given them the upper hand. As Musk's team worked their magic, the attackers began to realize that their grip on the White House was slipping. One of the leaders, a masked man known only as Spectre, paced back and forth in the dimly lit room where the hostages were being held. His men were on edge. He could feel the uncertainty in the air, but he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when everything they had worked for was so close. "Stay focused," Spectre ordered his team. "We have what we need. No one's leaving this building until we get what we came for." The men nodded, though their expressions betrayed a hint of doubt. Their plan had been too smooth in the beginning, and now it was unraveling. Spectre glanced at the digital clock on the wall. The hostages were still alive, but for how long? The tension in the air was thick enough to choke. He couldn't afford to let this slip. Not after everything they had done to get here. Suddenly, the quiet of the room was shattered by the sound of a distant explosion. It was muffled but unmistakable. The sound sent a ripple of panic through the attackers. "Get to the command center," Spectre shouted. Now, in the control room, Musk's team was working tirelessly, bypassing security measures and disabling systems the attackers had put in place. They were getting close. Musk's fingers flew across the keyboard as he scanned through layers of encrypted communication. "It's all coming together," Musk muttered to himself, his focus unwavering. He could feel the pressure mounting, but it was nothing new. He had saved lives before, in space, in business, in ways people didn't always understand. But this was something entirely different. He looked over to Oliver, his lead engineer. "How long until we have full access?" Oliver didn't look up from his screen but answered quickly. 5 minutes, maybe less. We've bypassed the main firewall. They're out of tricks." Musk nodded, his mind already calculating the next move. He knew the attackers wouldn't sit idly by. The moment they realized they were being tracked, they would fight back, and Musk didn't want to wait for that moment to come. He wanted to be one step ahead. Do you think they've got eyes on us yet? Musk asked. Probably. We're about to get their last remaining network feeds. If they don't know by now, they'll find out soon. Get me a live feed to the Situation Room, Musk said. I want Biden to have every tool at his disposal when we make our move. Back in the Situation Room, Biden's phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from Musk. I have eyes on the perimeter. Ready to move on your command? Biden's heart pounded as he read the message. This was it. The time had come to take back control of the White House. General MacArthur, Biden said, turning to the man who had been coordinating the military response. It's time. Coordinate with Musk's team. Let's get those hostages out of there. MacArthur nodded, his face grim. He had been part of many operations in his career, but nothing quite like this. The risks were high, but there was no room for hesitation. They were too close now. The hostages were in the final stages of their captivity, and it was crucial that the assault was precise. As MacArthur began to relay the orders, Biden stepped away from the table and walked to the window. He stared out at the White House grounds, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. This was more than just a political crisis. It was a personal one too. His duty to protect the American people, his family, and those inside these walls weighed heavily on him. He felt a surge of resolve. He had faced crises before, but this was different. The White House wasn't just a building. It was a symbol, a beacon of freedom and democracy. No matter the cost, he couldn't let this stand. As the operation began, the attackers made one final, desperate attempt to maintain control. They scrambled to their comms, but it was too late. Musk had already gained full access to their systems, neutralizing their attempts at communication. The ground shook slightly as a second explosion, louder this time, echoed through the building. This was the signal. Move in, Biden ordered, his voice unwavering. With the walls closing in on them, the attackers scrambled to secure their final position. They had no choice now but to make a stand. The White House was no longer their playground. It was their battleground. Spectre barked orders to his men, but even he knew it was too late. They had underestimated the resilience of the White House's defenders and the power of technology in the hands of those who truly understood it. As Musk's team took control of the White House's systems, every movement was tracked, every room mapped. The attackers, once confident and in control, were now trapped in a game of cat and mouse. As the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the White House halls, Biden's team moved swiftly. With the help of Musk's advanced technology, the building was alive with activity, every step meticulously coordinated to prevent another casualty. The Secret Service had positioned themselves in strategic locations, their movements synchronized with the military personnel now making their way through the corridors. Biden watched the monitors, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The tension in the room was palpable as his mind raced through every scenario, every possible outcome. The hostages were still alive, but their fate hung in the balance. Every second counted. He needed to be sure that when the final assault happened, it would be quick and precise. Mr. President, General MacArthur said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him, we've breached the main corridor. The hostages are being held on the lower levels. We've got eyes on them. Biden's heart skipped a beat. They were getting closer, but it wasn't enough. He had to know everything, every detail. How many attackers were there? What kind of weapons did they have left? Were they planning an ambush? Do we have a clear route? Biden asked, his voice calm but tense with urgency. Yes, sir, MacArthur replied. But we've encountered some resistance. The attackers are regrouping in a control room near the basement. We'll need to move in fast. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of responsibility. Biden knew the risks. Any misstep, any delay, could turn this operation into a disaster. At that moment, a new message flashed up on the secure line, a message from Musk. We have full system access, taking control of their communications and monitoring their movements. I've pinpointed their positions. Your teams are moving into position now. Biden nodded in approval. Musk was doing what he did best, working from behind the scenes, using his tech-savvy skills to give them the edge they needed. The operation was about to reach its critical juncture. We move now, Biden said, his voice resolute. In the basement of the White House, the hostage-takers were growing anxious. They had been forced to stay on the defensive for too long, their plans unraveling faster than they could keep up. Spectre paced in the dimly lit control room, the hum of malfunctioning electronics buzzing in the background. His men were scrambling, trying to maintain control over the building's security systems, but it was clear that Musk's team had gained the upper hand. The comms were down, their surveillance disrupted, and their movements were now being tracked in real time. The attackers had lost their advantage. Spectre slammed his fist into the wall. "We're not done yet," he muttered, though doubt was beginning to creep into his voice. He couldn't afford to show weakness. His men needed him. "We hold this position. No one gets through." His words were met with a series of nods, but the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. They had underestimated their enemy. They thought they could take down the White House without facing real resistance. But now, the walls were closing in, and their options were dwindling. "We've got incoming," one of the men said, his voice tight. "We've got eyes on military teams moving in." Spectre's pulse quickened. "Prepare to fight," he barked. "We're not going down without a fight." Back in the control room, Elon Musk watched the screens with unwavering focus. The situation was moving toward a breaking point, and he was determined to see it through. His team had disabled the attackers' ability to communicate, but the real challenge was still ahead. His drones were deployed, mapping the lower levels and providing a live feed to the Situation Room. The White House was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, but Musk's tech had created a digital map that allowed Biden's team to see the attackers' every move. It was as close to being inside the building without actually being there as possible. "Oliver, how's the feed?" Musk asked, never taking his eyes off the screen. "We've got full control," Oliver replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We're feeding real-time data to the teams in the field. They're moving in as we speak." Musk nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. They had taken back control. Now it was up to the teams on the ground to finish what they had started. In the hallway outside the control room, the military personnel moved swiftly, their heavy boots barely making a sound on the marble floors. Each step was measured, each decision calculated. The attackers had made their stand in the basement, but Biden's team was prepared. They were moving to neutralize the threat once and for all. MacArthur led the charge, his military background evident in the way he assessed the situation. Every move was precise, every angle covered. He knew they couldn't afford a mistake. "Sir, we've reached the basement," one of the soldiers reported through the comms. "The hostages are being held in a secured room. We've got 2 shooters inside, but they're distracted. Take them out quietly," MacArthur ordered. "We don't want to escalate this any more than we have to." The tension in the air was thick as the soldiers positioned themselves at the door. There was no room for error. Every moment was critical. With a swift nod, MacArthur gestured for the door to be breached. The sound of heavy boots and muffled commands filled the air as the team moved into position. Inside the control room, the attackers had no idea what was coming. They had been monitoring the White House's security for hours, but they had failed to realize that they were being monitored in turn. Musk's drones had mapped the building's security systems, and the attackers had no way of knowing that their every move was being tracked. Spectre's mind raced as he scanned the monitors, his eyes flicking from one screen to the next. They were out of time. "Ready the explosives," he ordered, his voice cold. "If they come in, we're taking them all down with us." But before the order could be fully carried out, the sound of boots pounding against the floor echoed through the room. The door exploded inward, and soldiers flooded into the space, their weapons raised. In that split second, chaos erupted. Spectre's men scrambled for their weapons, but it was too late. The soldiers were already on them, and the attackers' plan began to crumble. Musk's surveillance system had given Biden's team the advantage they needed. The hostages were secured, and the attackers were swiftly neutralized. Spectre, however, was not going down without a fight. With a wild look in his eyes, he lunged toward a console, his hand reaching for the detonator. "Stop him," one of the soldiers shouted. It was a race against time. The soldiers closed in on Spectre, but in the chaos, one of his men managed to fire a shot. The sound echoed through the room, but the bullet missed its mark. Spector's hand hovered over the detonator, his face twisted in fury. "Not today," a voice said, calm but firm. It was Musk, standing in the doorway. He had joined the assault team, his expression unreadable as he calmly advanced into the room. With a flick of his wrist, he disabled the device that would have destroyed everything. Spector's eyes widened, the realization of his defeat setting in. He had underestimated his opponents, and now, it was over. "You're finished," Musk said, his voice steady. "Drop the weapon." Back in the Oval Office, Biden stood before the monitors, watching the final moments unfold. His heart raced as he saw Spector and his men being taken into custody. The hostages were safe. The crisis was over. He exhaled deeply, his body sagging with relief. The battle was won, but the work wasn't over. There would be questions to answer, decisions to make, and the political ramifications would be felt for years to come. But for now, he could take comfort in the fact that the White House had held strong. And it had held strong because of the people who had fought to protect it, from the military personnel who stormed the building to Musk, whose technology had turned the tide of battle. As the soldiers rounded up the last of the attackers and the final explosive devices were safely neutralized, the sense of relief in the air was almost palpable. The immediate danger had passed, but Biden knew the work was far from over. His mind, which had been racing with decisions and calculations for hours, now began to slow as the enormity of what had just happened settled in. His gaze moved to the secure line where the final reports were coming in from the field. The hostages had been released from their captivity in the basement, unharmed for the most part. There were some injuries, a few bruises, but nothing life-threatening. The immediate crisis had been averted. He stood there, his hands resting on the table, absorbing the news in silence. It had all happened so quickly, too quickly. There had been moments when he wasn't sure if the operation would succeed, moments where the fear of losing everything gnawed at him. But now, with the crisis averted, Biden had time to think about what came next. "Mr. President," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. "The operation was a success. The hostages are safe, and the threat has been neutralized." Biden didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded, his mind replaying the events of the past several hours. This had been a close call, closer than any of them had anticipated. The White House had been compromised, its security breached, and lives had hung in the balance. But it hadn't been a random attack. There was something more to this. Something that didn't add up. "Get me Musk," Biden said, his voice steady but firm. "I want to talk to him." Minutes later, the secure line buzzed as Musk's face appeared on the screen. He looked as calm as ever, though Biden could see the hint of exhaustion in his eyes. The weight of the day had been hard on everyone, but for Musk, the mental strain was something only he could understand. "Mr. President," Musk said, his voice unbothered but his gaze intense. "What can I do for you?" Biden leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Musk. There were no pleasantries, no gratitude for the incredible work Musk had done to secure the White House. There was something far more important at hand. "Elon," Biden began, "this wasn't just a random attack, was it?" Musk's expression didn't change. "No, it wasn't." Biden sighed, rubbing his temples as the weight of the situation pressed down on him once again. Then who were they working for? Why target the White House? What was their real objective? Musk paused, clearly considering his words carefully. "I think it's more than just a political statement. The attackers had resources, advanced surveillance, hacking capabilities. This wasn't a ragtag group of criminals. Someone was pulling the strings." Biden leaned back in his chair, his thoughts racing. "Someone with influence. Someone with connections. And we've been too blind to see it?" Musk didn't offer an answer, but his eyes told Biden everything he needed to know. The mastermind behind this attack was someone powerful, someone who could stay in the shadows and manipulate events from afar. "This goes deeper than we realized," Biden said quietly. "What happens next?" The aftermath of the attack was swift. Biden addressed the nation, calming the public with assurances that the White House was secure and that the situation had been handled effectively. But the political ramifications of what had happened couldn't be ignored. There were questions that had yet to be answered, and suspicions that needed to be investigated. As Biden stood before the press, answering questions about the breach and what had been done to prevent further incidents, his mind was already in the next phase of crisis management. The White House was still under scrutiny, and the public was demanding answers. The role of the technology industry in the operation was not lost on anyone either. Elon Musk had been a key player in neutralizing the threat, and there was no denying the impact his technological solutions had. But there was a question in Biden's mind that wouldn't go away. What was the real motive behind the attack? Who stood to gain from destabilizing the nation's center of power? The answers were elusive, but they were out there. And Biden was determined to find them. Meanwhile, in the control room, Musk sat back in his chair, reflecting on the events that had just unfolded. His role in this mission had been crucial, but he couldn't help but wonder about the bigger picture. This attack had been well planned, and the attackers had been smart, too smart. They had been prepared for every eventuality, and Musk's team had had to work on the fly to outmaneuver them. It was a victory, but a hollow one. Something didn't sit right with Musk, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. "Oliver," Musk said, his voice low. "We need to start digging into the intelligence. The attackers were more sophisticated than we realized. I want to know everything about their tech capabilities." Oliver, ever the loyal engineer, nodded. "On it, Elon. We'll dig into every piece of intel we have." Musk's mind was already spinning, piecing together the information he had. There were no coincidences in this world. Someone had orchestrated this attack, and Musk had a feeling it was only a matter of time before he uncovered the identity of the mastermind. Days passed, and the White House returned to some semblance of normalcy, but the investigation into the attack continued. The FBI and CIA had been working around the clock, reviewing evidence and tracking down leads. But nothing seemed to add up. The attackers had been prepared, with advanced technology that was nearly impossible to trace. Biden had asked Musk to join the investigation, and Musk had agreed, offering his expertise in cybersecurity and surveillance. He was the best in the world at what he did, and Biden trusted him. But even Musk was struggling to make sense of the encrypted data that had been recovered from the attackers' devices. "Their trail is cold," Musk muttered, staring at his screen. "Whoever is behind this is covering their tracks like a pro." "Do you think it's a nation-state?" Sarah asked, sitting across from Musk at a makeshift command center. "Could be," Musk replied. "But it doesn't feel like that. This isn't some rogue operation from a foreign government. This feels more like a corporate attack. Someone with the resources to manipulate technology on this scale." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A corporation? You think a company had this much influence?" Musk didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing, pulling at threads that didn't quite connect. But one thought kept returning to him. This wasn't a random attack. This was calculated. This was personal. "I think we're dealing with someone who's been operating in the shadows for years," Musk said finally, his voice quiet but certain. "And we're just beginning to scratch the surface." Back in the Oval Office, Biden sat in silence, staring out the window. The sky was overcast, the clouds heavy with the threat of rain. It was a metaphor for the uncertainty that still hung over the nation. The attack had been averted, but the damage was done. The trust between the government and the people had been shaken, and the political fallout would reverberate for years to come. But Biden knew one thing: the real fight was just beginning. He had to find the people behind this attack, no matter the cost. There was no turning back now. The weeks following the White House siege were tense and filled with uncertainty. Despite the crisis having been narrowly averted, there was a sense of unease that lingered. The investigation was in full swing, but answers seemed elusive. Each lead that came in was dead-ended, and every piece of technology recovered from the attackers was encrypted beyond even Musk's formidable abilities. Biden had called in the top intelligence agencies, but they, too, were struggling to break through the sophisticated layers of encryption the attackers had left behind. The perpetrators had covered their tracks so well that it was as if they had vanished into thin air. Still, Biden remained determined. The fact that Musk had been able to assist in the rescue operation did not escape him. Elon Musk had proven his worth once again, and now Biden was relying on him more than ever. One evening, as the sun began to set over Washington, D.C., Musk sat alone in a small, dimly lit room at the White House. He had been working non-stop for days, trying to crack the last of the encrypted data. His eyes were tired, but his focus remained unwavering. He knew that the key to solving this mystery lay within the data that had been recovered. He had already tried every conventional method, but the attackers were smart, far smarter than anyone had anticipated. But Musk was used to difficult challenges, and this was no exception. "Oliver," Musk called out, breaking the silence in the room. His lead engineer appeared, rubbing his eyes as if he had been up for just as long. "What's up?" "I found something," Musk said, pointing to his screen. "It's subtle, but I think we're onto something. There's a backdoor I missed before. It's not just about the encryption. It's about how it was hidden. Whoever did this was hiding in plain sight. This isn't just some rogue group, this feels organized." Oliver stepped forward, squinting at the data. "You think they're connected to a corporation?" Musk leaned back, thinking carefully. "Not just any corporation. I'm starting to think this is connected to a tech conglomerate. Something big, something that has the resources to orchestrate this kind of attack on a global scale." At the same time, in the Oval Office, Biden paced back and forth. His mind was clouded with frustration, but he refused to give up. The attack had shaken the country to its core, but there was something deeper that bothered him. Whoever had orchestrated the attack hadn't just targeted the White House for political gain. There was something more personal about it. There was a message hidden within the chaos, something he still couldn't piece together. He had a feeling that this was no random terrorist attack. This was something calculated, and it was something that had been in the making for a long time. Biden couldn't shake the thought that the attackers knew something about him, something they were using against him. But his phone rang, pulling him out of his reverie. It was Musk. "Mr. President," Musk's voice crackled through the line, "I think we've found something. It's big. Really big." Biden's heart quickened. "What is it, Elon?" Musk paused, then spoke with the clarity of someone who had just discovered something monumental. "I've been digging into the data, and it's pointing to a massive corporate conglomerate. One that has been in the background, pulling strings in industries across the globe. They've been operating for years, and they've been covering their tracks so well that no one's even thought to look for them. But I'm starting to think they're behind the attack." Biden's mind raced. "Are you saying a corporation is responsible for this? How big are we talking?" "Think global," Musk replied. "We're talking about a conglomerate with fingers in every pie, from technology to finance to government contracts. This is no small player. And they have the means and the motive to pull off something like this." Biden absorbed the news in silence. It made sense, but it also felt impossible. How could a corporation have orchestrated something so far-reaching, so dangerous? What could their motive possibly be? "Do you have any leads?" Biden asked, his voice tight. "I'm working on it," Musk said. "But I need more time. We're digging into their financials, their web of connections. Whoever they are, they've been operating in the shadows for far too long." Biden closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. This was the moment he had been fearing, the realization that this was bigger than just a political attack. It was a war, and it was happening right under their noses. The following days were a blur of frantic activity. Musk, with the help of his team, continued to dig deeper into the hidden connections of the mysterious corporation. The puzzle pieces slowly began to fit together, but the more Musk uncovered, the more complex the situation became. Late one evening, Musk sat in his office, staring at the data on his screen. His eyes narrowed as he found something that had been right in front of him all along, a link between the corporation and several high-profile individuals, many of whom had close ties to key members of the US government. "This isn't just about control," Musk muttered to himself. "This is about manipulation. This is about creating a reality where they control everything." He immediately messaged Biden. "Mr. President, I think I have it. The corporation is manipulating key figures in government and tech. They've infiltrated key positions of power, and they've been using their influence to shape policy and events. This attack was just a warning." Biden's response came almost immediately. "What are they trying to accomplish? What do they want?" Musk didn't have an immediate answer, but he knew one thing. This was more than just a financial takeover. The attack on the White House was only the beginning. Whoever was behind this had a grand plan, and they would stop at nothing to see it through. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Musk and his team uncovered a massive cover-up involving government contracts and backdoor deals. The corporation had been systematically infiltrating government agencies, manipulating key figures in power, and orchestrating a series of events to further their own agenda. Musk's findings were staggering, but it was clear that the situation had become far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Biden stood in the Situation Room, surrounded by his closest advisors, as Musk presented the findings. The evidence was overwhelming. The corporation had been systematically influencing both the political landscape and the tech industry, using their resources to control the flow of information and decision-making. "This is far beyond what we first thought," Musk said, his voice steady but filled with frustration. "They're not just after power, they're after control. They want to dictate the future of this nation." Biden's face hardened as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. "What do we do now?" Musk didn't hesitate. "We take them down. We expose them for what they are. It won't be easy, but we have to go public. We can't let them continue operating in the shadows." Biden nodded. "I agree. But we need to be careful. This is bigger than anything we've faced before. We need to make sure we're ready." As the nation braced for the inevitable fallout, Biden took to the podium, ready to address the public. The weight of the situation was heavy on his shoulders, but he knew the truth had to be revealed. "Fellow Americans," he began, his voice steady and calm, "the events of the past weeks have shaken us all. But what we've uncovered is even more troubling. We've discovered that a powerful corporation has been operating in the shadows, manipulating key figures in government and industry for their own gain. They orchestrated the recent attack on the White House as part of their plan to seize control." The room fell silent, the gravity of Biden's words sinking in. "We will not be intimidated," Biden continued. "We will fight back. We will take down those responsible for this attack, and we will restore the integrity of our nation." As the investigation reached its final stages, the corporation's leaders were arrested, their network of corruption unraveled for the world to see. The attack on the White House had been their last move in a long game, but it was one that would ultimately be their downfall. Biden stood before the nation once more, his eyes filled with resolve. The country had been tested, but it had emerged stronger. And at the center of it all was Elon Musk, an unlikely hero whose technological brilliance had turned the tide and saved countless lives.